Hi, my name is Aaron Vitus. I'm the CEO of the world's fastest growing customer journey mapping platform, Strategy Box. And I'm here to tell you the story of how I accidentally got a New York Times Best Seller published. And what it taught me was that life's always kind of guiding you, even in disappointment, into something much bigger. And this story starts a few years ago when I was the managing director of a small digital marketing agency here in Vancouver. I was kind of at a crossroads in my life, wasn't particularly enjoying the position, and a recruiter called me one day and said, "Hey, I've got a software spin-off of a current company that needs a CEO. They're out of Toronto. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I got hooked up. The CEO's name of the parent company was a guy named Phil Caravaggio. The company's called Precision Nutrition. And we started chatting and, kind of going through the motions of a job interview process. And in passing, we got talking about investing. And I'm a big investment nerd. And if for those that there's a company called Bridgewater, and it's run by a guy named Ray Dalio. And Ray is one of the most successful investors of the 20th century and 21st century. And a few years ago, he put out his investment philosophy on his website. It was called Principles. And if I'm honest, it was essentially a very poorly edited Word document. It was just like, hey, these are my rules for investing. For someone like me and for someone like Phil, it was fascinating because here's this insight into this guy's mind. And you got to see how he thinks. So we started talking, about how excited that makes us. And then in passing, Phil mentioned that the principles had impacted him so much, he actually had a professional copy writer and a professional book designer take that kind of shoddily written Word doc and put it into a book. And he had 2 copies made and they had little carrying cases. And he just said, "Listen, I don't know Ray. I did this. I want to get it into Ray's hands." And that's it. And then we continued on our conversation. I hung up the phone and I thought, well, I actually know somebody that works at Bridgewater. And it was his chief of staff, and kind of through a friend of a friend, somebody I used to work with. And I eventually got an intro. I made the necessary connections. Phil flew down to Connecticut. He kind of slid the book across to this chief of staff. And that was kind of it. He said it was a super awkward meeting. And then a few weeks go by and I get a call from Phil and he says, "Hey, I just had the strangest conversation. I just talked to Ray Dalio for a few hours. And I want to let you know, you just made my life." And I said, "What? What happened?" And he said, "Well, apparently he got the copies of the books from his chief of staff. He was over the moon and he was super interested and he wants to fly me down to Connecticut to hang out for the day." So at this point, I'm like, if I don't get this job, this is guaranteed. This is a lock. Phil and Ray actually end up working together. They actually designed the design that Phil came up with. The book designer is actually this book. It's Principles, and it was then published, became a New York Times bestseller. You go to the acknowledgments and it thanks Phil Caravaggio, and yeah, that was me just helping somebody out because I was interviewing for a job. Now, the end of the story that's kind of one cool part of the story. There is a disappointment and then a very cool end of the story. And the disappointment was I didn't get the job. Phil and I are actually very alike. And Phil made I think at the time, a call that had a lot of wisdom in it, which was eventually we were going to go do this. And we weren't going to work well together. And that was a really interesting, I was gutted at the time. And that was a really something I kind of pinned my hopes on because I was kind of stuck in my career. However, after saying no to hiring me, Phil called and said, "Well, you changed my life in a fundamental way. And I know you love to travel. So here's 2 tickets around the world. And go take some time. You deserve it." And that was pretty cool. So I quit my job. I took 6 months off and I traveled to all the places in the world that 12-year-old me hadn't been to yet and would really think were cool. So I went to Tokyo, I went to South Africa, I went to Morocco, I went to Spain, and it was because I helped somebody out and I got this incredible experience. On that trip, I met a lot of people, but also I started thinking about kind of what I'm up to in the world and what I'm doing. And I got the idea for Strategy Box because I at the time had been consulting, I'd run this agency, but really none of it really lit me up. And I said, oh, okay, well, what's the opportunity here? And what are you doing that actually brings you joy? And he said, well, I'm actually really scared about this customer journey mapping platform idea I've really had. And I was sitting in Cape Town, South Africa on Table Mountain, and I went, I gotta go do that. And so I started pursuing it. And now we are one of the world's fastest growing SaaS companies. And I have to credit Phil and I have to credit Ray for guiding me to that. And that's the lesson I want to impart in this kind of mental health Monday, is that often life is leading you into something much greater. Actually, it isn't often, it is always leading you into something much greater. And what you have to do is pay attention to those signs. And when you do, literally extraordinary things can happen to you. So that's my tip for this week. Thanks for listening.